In this video, we're going to be discussing Bitcoin and learn a little bit how it works under the hood. We're not going to go into too much detail into Bitcoin or how it works. There is a lot of resources online that you can find that teach you everything you need to know about Bitcoin, but we're going to go through and get a basic understanding of the systems involved in Bitcoin. So before we get too far into Bitcoin here, let's be sure we understand what exactly Bitcoin is. In this case, Bitcoin is the most widely used currency for the deep web. That isn't one of its main things that people talk about when talking about Bitcoin, but for our purpose, it is very important to note that. On top of that, Bitcoin is what's called a decentralized cryptocurrency, which just means it's decentralized, not controlled by one central source, and it's crypto, meaning it's on a computer. It's not actual physical money. Bitcoin is useful to purchase things on the deep web or dark web because it's anonymous and fairly easy to use. However, as far as long-term investing in Bitcoin or anything like that, it's highly volatile and always changing in price. So it's not really ever something you want to try to put too much money into without knowing exactly what you are doing. So some people have an issue with Bitcoin because they're used to this. They're used to the physical money, which is backed by banks or governments. But of course, Bitcoin is not backed by a bank or government. It's backed by the people, and the people say how much it's worth, and that is what gives it its value. Now, normal money, a bank or a government will just tell you what that money is worth, and then you just come to accept that. And Bitcoin works differently because it's not one central source. It's everyone involved in the Bitcoin process who actually determines the price of Bitcoin. And a lot of people argue, Bitcoin's on the computer, so how can it be worth anything when it has nothing physical behind it to back it up? There's no actual Bitcoin you can hold in your hand. And this can be confusing for some people, but the analogy I like to use to kind of clear this up is, if you have ever used a credit card or a debit card, it works in the same way. That's not physical money. It's just a piece of plastic that says you have money on there, and it is still accepted because the value on that card could be turned into actual money. And just like that card could be turned into money, Bitcoin could also be turned into real money, which is essentially what gives it value. The process of how Bitcoin works is fairly simple. Bitcoin at its core is simply just a ledger. And this ledger contains names and the balance of those people, and that's how it keeps track of what Bitcoin is out there and who has what amount of Bitcoin. Now, say two people wanted to trade Bitcoin for a item or service. Once they did this trade, the ledger would update and then it would reflect their balances accordingly. Now, all these transactions on Bitcoin are protected by what's called a signature, and it's kind of a handshake between users that actually authenticates the transaction. This signature is useful because someone random couldn't just try to update the ledger and say, hey, I traded 100 Bitcoins with Cindy. Because they all have this signature, which are created by your own actual Bitcoin wallet, and this signature is different every time. And mathematically speaking, it's impossible to get the same signature twice ever. So it's what keeps it secure and what keeps it unique. So we talked about how Bitcoin is a ledger, but obviously one person doesn't have this ledger. If you run a Bitcoin mining node or you participate in Bitcoin mining, you will have a copy of this ledger. And so that means a lot of people around the entire world have this copy. And basically what will happen is one of the ledgers gets updated because there was a transaction made. And then that ledger will broadcast to the rest of the network that a change has been made, and they will all update their ledgers accordingly, assuming, of course, that the signature checked out and everything was good on that end. Now, you don't have to be a part of this whole ledger system to actually trade Bitcoin. You could still trade Bitcoin freely without partaking in any of the Bitcoin mining or managing, being what's called a super user for Bitcoin. You don't have to do any of that. You could buy and sell Bitcoin freely without taking care of handling a ledger or anything like that. So that's just a basic idea of Bitcoin. We didn't dive too deep into it, of course, because it can get very technical very fast, and we want to avoid getting too in-depth into Bitcoin because that's not what this course is focusing on. Hopefully this gave you a basic understanding of what exactly Bitcoin is and why it's more anonymous than regular money. You can see here it's more anonymous because it's managed by a bunch of people, not by any corporations or governments. And obviously we've talking about this ledger earlier before, but these ledgers are not, they don't actually have your name and your balance. They more have what's your what's called your wallet ID, and that wallet ID is going to be a long string of numbering characters. So it doesn't have anything that's actually attached to you, and you don't need any specific credentials to open up a Bitcoin wallet, which is why people tend to like it, because it's fairly anonymous in that way. So hopefully that gave you a better understanding. If you have any more questions about Bitcoin, I urge you to just hit Google and kind of look up some of the things about Bitcoin. There's a lot of great videos and learning resources out there. And we'll dive a little bit more into Bitcoin in some of the other courses on Deep Web Academy, but we won't go too in depth in this one. So that does it for this video. In the next video, we're going to give you a brief introduction to Tails, the Tails operating system, which we've mentioned before in this course. And then after that, we're going to start wrapping things up and actually get into hands-on use with Tor and start exploring the deep web.